Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
I am going to tell you exactly how it happened, because the version that made its way through cousins and neighbors leaves out the quiet parts that actually matter. The parts where you decide whether you are going to keep playing a rigged game or you are going to step off the board and let the people who rigged it play against themselves. And it started when my mother tapped her glass, waited until everyone gave her the attention she believed she was born to command, and said with a smile that had been rehearsed for years that I was out of the will, which landed like a cue line for the laughs she knew would follow. And they did, the kind of laughter that does not come from surprise, but from relief. Because nothing brings my family together quite like making me the common enemy they can all feel better than. You would think a line like that would sting the way fresh lemon stings a cut, but the truth is that it settled over me the way a final email closes a long, boring thread, because none of this was new, not the public performance. Not the way my brother performs success like he is auditioning for a promotion inside the family. Not the way my sister sells sweetness and then uses it like a blade, and not my mother, who has always believed that control is love so long as she is the one defining both. And while they laughed, I looked at my water and thought about how many times I have paid for my own car repairs in cash because I was taught not to ask for help. And how many times they told me independence was a virtue until it was time to measure a child's worth by how many checks she brought home for mom to bless. And in that moment, I felt something inside me lock into place the way a safe does when you finally spin to the right number. I did not raise my voice or throw a scene or explain myself to people who decided long ago that explanations from me are just requests for permission in disguise. Because I have learned that when a person tries to embarrass you in public, you do not fix it with a speech, you fix it with a boundary. And as the laughter rolled around the table like a cheap tide, my brother tried to turn it into a toast about family values and merit. And my sister made a small sound that was supposed to read as sympathy but landed like a wink, and my mother watched me the way a landlord watches a tenant facing eviction, waiting for the beg, the bargain, the scene, anything that would confirm the story she tells about me. The one where I am a burden that should be grateful for basic consideration, and there was a second where I thought about standing up and leaving. But leaving would have let them keep the last word, and I have learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay seated and make your point quiet enough that only the person who needs to hear it can hear it. If you are wondering whether I had prepared for this exact moment, the answer is yes, in the way you prepare for a predictable storm by keeping your roof in good order, which is to say years of keeping my accounts clean, my paperwork tighter than a drum, my decisions boring and solid and mine, years of building a life that never needed their approval because it was never going to get it. And I do not say that to brag, I say it because there is a strength that comes from funding your own choices and keeping your mouth shut while everyone else narrates your failure. And I had stored that strength for a day like this, not to crush anyone or humiliate them, but to free myself from a script I never auditioned for. And if that sounds cold, then you have never been smiled at while being erased. My mother launched into something about standards and legacy, and how hard it is to make decisions that keep a family strong, and every phrase was a lock clicking on the door she meant to close on me forever. And the old me would have explained that I never asked for a dime, and that I was not a risk to be managed, but a daughter to be loved. Yet explanations are wasted on people who only listen for confession, so instead I let her finish. Let my brother add a line about being there for one another, let my sister sigh like a soap actress who just learned the shocking truth, and I waited until even the pitying looks were in place like props on a set, because if they were going to turn me into a scene, then I would choose the line that closed it. I leaned toward my mother so that no one else would get the satisfaction of my voice, and with the same steady tone I use when signing documents that matter, I said, "That is fine, Mom, because I already made my own estate bigger than yours anyway." And I did not blink or flinch or smile or explain. I just let the words sit where she had placed her announcement, and I watched her eyes try to do the math she did not know existed. And then I sat back in my chair and waited, because what came next would not be a laugh. If you want to understand why I did not fall apart when my mother announced that I was cut out of the will, you have to see the pattern that trained me not to ask and not to expect. Because long before the laugh track at that table, there were smaller shows where the cast was the same and the plot never changed. the ones where my brother was the promising son who just needed one more check to bridge a gap between internships that somehow never covered rent. My sister was the sweet achiever who deserved a rehearsal dinner that looked like a magazine spread even if the balance on the family card muttered for months afterward. And I was the reliable background character who could be counted on to drive, babysit, edit resumes, assemble furniture, and nod while being told that independence builds character, which is a nice slogan until you realize it usually means you will carry your own load and someone else's while being told to smile about it. I learned early that if I wanted anything to last, it had to be built on my name and my effort, and not on the fluctuating weather of their approval. So I worked the kind of jobs people overlook because they do not come with prestige. The weekend childcare that stretched from sunrise to past bedtime, the after-school tutoring that somehow included dinner and dishes because a grateful parent pressed cash into my hand and said I saved their week, the short-term rental turnovers that started as a favor for a neighbor and turned into a list of hosts who paid on time because I invoiced like a grown-up and never missed a window, and while it would have been easy to let resentment chew through me, I treated it like a fuel line instead. Sending that money into a boring emergency fund, then into coursework taught by a retired accountant who showed me how to read a contract until it blinked, how to register for the right taxes, and how to say the word no without an apology attached to it. When my brother asked me to co-sign for a truck because he said my credit score was cleaner than his, and I should be proud to help a man who was carrying the family name forward, I said I would be happy to loan him a fixed amount from my own savings if he signed a simple agreement that listed collateral and a timeline, and he laughed the way people laugh when they think you are play-acting adulthood, which is why later, when the clock ran out on a smaller, unpaid loan for which I had written terms, I sent a calm notice and collected what was due in used equipment he valued for bragging rights and I valued for resale. And while it was not about the money, it felt like finally answering a question I had been asked since childhood about whether I was serious or just convenient. My sister loved to assume that my time belonged to her because I did not have a family of my own that needed scheduling, which is how I found myself picking up dresses from fittings and delivering centerpieces the week before her big day. And when she told me that my work had the honor of being part of something beautiful even if she could not pay me, I built a rate sheet that looked clean and professional, posted it where clients could easily find it, and the next time she tried to book me for free, I replied with the same copy I used for strangers and included the late fee policy, and I will not pretend that sending an invoice to a sister felt natural, but it felt honest. And when she skipped payment, I marked her account in my records the way any business would and never let her put me on a leash made of guilt again. My mother kept a running inventory of who owed her gratitude, which meant her affection could be turned on or off like a faucet depending on who had most recently made the kinds of visible choices she liked to stand next to in conversations. Yet whenever she walked me through the arithmetic of sacrifice, she always forgot the totals on my side of the ledger. The nights I stayed at the hospital with our grandmother so she could sleep at home and still hold the title of devoted daughter, the loan. I refused to call a loan when my parents were behind on a tax bill and the penalty was about to make a small problem into a headline inside our family. And I stopped correcting those omissions because there is a point where accuracy is not the goal anymore and distance is. By the time that dinner arrived, I had already separated my life from their paperwork in every way that mattered. Closing the shared accounts my mother insisted helped the family qualify for discounts. Changing my emergency contacts to people who actually show up, setting my own will so that there would be no confusion later about what I built and why. And I kept that quiet not because I was hiding, but because I was done auditioning for people who confused transparency with permission, which is why her announcement did not feel like a door slamming, but like a final receipt printing on a long settled balance. If you were looking for the first piece of revenge, it did not come in a spray of words or a dramatic exit. It came the day I priced my time and refused to give away what I needed to build a life. It came when I turned their free favors into a waiting list of paying clients and let that income pay for the lawyer who made sure my documents would not melt under pressure, and it came that night when, while the table pretended to reset itself with dessert menus and deflection, I pulled out my phone, opened the draft I had prepared for exactly this kind of scene, and sent a single, Boring email to the attorney who has managed my filings for years with a short instruction to finalize the transfer we had queued to a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name for first-generation students who were told to be independent. Then I put my phone face down and looked at my mother and thought, you cannot disinherit a person who already opted out, and the best part is that you will not understand what just moved until it is far too late to pull it back. People like to imagine that a single bold move built my leverage, that I stumbled into some lucky break and rode it like a parade float. Yet the truth is that what I own and what I protect came from a long string of plain choices stacked the way boring bricks make a strong wall. Because after years of listening to my mother Evelyn explain that love is expressed through control and resources are dispensed to the children who reflect well on the family, and after watching my brother Mark and my sister Lena accept that bargain with both hands the way you accept a drink you did not pay for and then brag about the taste, I decided that any life I could be proud of would have to be funded by invoices with my name on them, contracts I could read without flinching, and accounts that did not rely on whether I happened to be in favor that month. I started with work that dignified me even when it did not impress anyone at Sunday dinner, picking up after short-term rentals until the hosts learned that a reliable turnover is worth more than staged photos. Building a small list of subcontractors who answered the phone the first time because I paid them on time the first time. Buying supplies wholesale after a manager in a hardware store taught me the quiet math of margins. And using that margin to pay for evening classes with a retired accountant who turned the fog of paperwork into sentences I understood. So I registered a clean company, opened separate accounts, built a calendar for quarterly taxes that did not surprise me, and because no one in my family admires self-sufficiency unless it is performed as gratitude, I kept my mouth shut while the balance moved from a cautious emergency fund into the kinds of investments that do not glitter in conversation but grow when you sleep, namely a broad market index plan, a certificate of deposit ladder, and small pieces of steady local businesses that wanted a quiet partner who read the minutes and asked for audited statements instead of free muffins. When Mark suggested I back a side hustle that felt more like a dare than a business, I declined with a written letter that thanked him for thinking of me and attached a simple term sheet in case he wanted an actual loan with collateral. And when Lena tried to book me for a weekend's worth of wedding tasks under the label of sisterly help, I replied with the same client language I used for strangers and included the late fee policy, and while both of them rolled their eyes the way people do when a woman stops being decorative and starts being precise, I kept moving, purchasing a small duplex with partners who cared about predictable returns more than stories, learning how to screen tenants without cruelty and how to fix a leak without making it a crisis. Then, when the time was right, exchanging that asset for a slightly larger building, not because I wanted to brag about doors, but because I wanted the cash flow that allows you to say no without raising your voice. I built an umbrella company with a plain name that sits on leases, service agreements, and a modest line of credit, and under that umbrella I place the kind of assets that do not make for flashy photos, but do make for boring stability. Like a share in a reputable plumbing firm whose owner was ready to retire, a slice of a self-storage facility on the edge of town that has a waiting list longer than any invitation my family guards, and a portfolio of vendor contracts that renew unless someone drops the ball, which I do not, and because all of it lives inside structures that were drawn up by a lawyer who charges by the hour and is worth every dollar, it does not need approval, applause, or Thanksgiving speeches to keep breathing. I also built the part of my estate that looks like generosity but is actually clarity. Setting up a scholarship fund in my grandmother Ruth's name that awards first-generation students who were told that independence is character only when it saves the family money, and I wrote rules that keep meddling hands off the selection process. Then I registered the program's name and set up governance that requires real minutes and real audits so no one can wave it like a social trophy, and while I know my mother will hate that the legacy she likes to borrow at parties now has a door she cannot open without knocking, I did not design it to hurt her. I designed it to protect what it is meant to do long after her opinions about me have cooled. If you are looking for the revenge in all of this, it is not the money and it is not the assets. It is the way each careful decision pulled a thread out of the family's net until I could walk without feeling wrapped. It is the way I stopped arguing about love and started controlling the levers that decide whether I am safe. And it is the way that, after whispering at that dinner that my estate is larger than the one she uses like a throne, I opened my phone in the ride home. Confirmed receipt from my attorney that the scholarship transfer had cleared and the governance board had its first meeting date, and then drafted one more instruction authorizing a purchase that had been waiting in escrow while I endured dessert. A purchase that would not change the paint or the furniture in my mother's house, but would change the name on a piece of paper she has never bothered to read, after which I put the phone away, folded my hands, and let the quiet settle, because by the time Evelyn notices the letter in her mailbox with my company name in the corner, the laugh she rehearsed will not come as easily. Silence after a sanctioned laugh has a sound of its own, and I do not need to dress it up for you, because once I said what I said and leaned back without offering a single extra word, the air at that table changed in a way that even my mother could not smooth over with her usual performance. And you would have seen Mark stare at me with the puzzled expression of a man who just realized the person he has been calling irresponsible might be the only adult in the room, and you would have seen Lena do the small calculation she always does when a power line moves. And you would have watched my mother try to continue with her speech about legacy and standards before realizing that the room was no longer following her rhythm, and that her daughter, who never asked for seconds on anything, had just taken away the only leverage she ever truly enjoyed, which was the promise that one day she would hold a pen over a document and I would sit at attention like a child hoping for a ribbon. I did not argue, I did not explain, and I did not itemize anything for them, because the second you start listing proof in a family that prefers stories to facts, you become the defendant in a trial that never ends. So I let the pause belong to me, took a sip of water to mark the moment, told the server to split my check from the group because I will not be made generous on command anymore, and then I stood up, thanked everyone for inviting me as if the evening had not included a public demotion, and promised to send photos of Grandma Ruth's scholarship ceremony when the board finishes the final approvals, which earned me an eye roll from my mother because she hates when I use real nouns she cannot rearrange, after which I walked out calm and complete, leaving them to handle the dessert tray without the usual side order of my feelings. The messages began before I reached home because control hates a vacuum and my mother never misses an opening, so she sent a long text explaining that I had misunderstood her, that this was about fairness and predictability and protecting the family from drama, and that she was willing to revisit the conversation if I apologized for being disrespectful during a special evening. And then Mark called to tell me that if I really had built something, I should consider showing him how to park income in a way that qualifies him for a mortgage he cannot otherwise meet. And then Lena, soft as always when she wants something for free, asked whether I could help with a tiny issue at her boutique because the landlord is being unreasonable about maintenance and the lease renewal, and while the old me would have taken those as assignments that prove I am useful, the current me answered with the same uniform language I keep on file for clients and critics, thanking them for reaching out, declining to discuss private finances, and pointing them toward the appropriate professional channels, including the email for the new property manager, whose name they would soon learn whether they liked it or not. You remember the purchase I told you was waiting in escrow while I smiled through dinner, the plain file with signatures that would change a small thing on paper and a large thing in practice? Well, it cleared that night after my attorney received my go-ahead from the parking lot, which is why by morning, before my mother poured her first cup of coffee, there was an envelope on her doormat with my company name on the corner and a simple notice inside stating that the building where Lena leases her bridal boutique now has a new owner and a new point of contact, that all existing terms would be honored exactly as written, that all freebies and off-the-books arrangements are discontinued, and that all communications will run through the portal like they do for every other tenant. And I want you to hear me clearly when I say this was not about punishing my sister. It was about ending a long habit of turning my time and labor into a family tithe while being told to be grateful, and nothing ends that habit faster than a standard lease applied fairly with no backdoors. My mother followed with a brisk voice message about how it is tasteless to insert business into family matters and how she would be calling the old landlord to fix this misunderstanding, which of course she could not. And then she tried her favorite pivot by reminding me that she had a pending donation to the community center that would bear her name and demonstrate our family's commitment to service, unaware or unwilling to recall that the naming rights in that agreement belong to the party who actually funds the project according to the schedule on page 3, and that the funds were already wired from my foundation the night before in honor of Grandma Ruth, meaning the plaque that she has mentioned in every conversation for months will carry a name she never thought to say out loud. And if that sounds sharp to you, I understand, but I also know that no one learns to respect a boundary you refuse to defend. When Lena wrote me a familiar message about how sisters should do for each other without paperwork, I replied that sisters should also pay vendors on time, should stop borrowing the hardworking reputation of people they refuse to compensate, and should feel free to move to a different space at the end of the term if the new reality of normal rent and normal rules feels unlivable. And although I said it kindly, I meant every word, because I am done financing the myth that I am happiest when I am small and grateful, and even if she hates me for a season, she will know exactly where she stands, which is not under my thumb, but also not on my back. If you are asking where the revenge is in all this beyond the whispered line at the table, it is right here in the way I stopped justifying and started governing. In the way a building that paid for free favors now pays for scholarships with a name that belongs to the only woman who ever showed me unwavering kindness, and in the way my mother, who has loved letters more than people for as long as I can remember, opened one that told her the story had moved on without her edits, and while I did not gloat or post a thing or even raise my voice, I did schedule one more delivery she will open tomorrow. A simple certified packet containing a copy of my formal notice disclaiming any future claim on her estate, and a short letter thanking her for the clarity she gave me at dinner, which will land with a force she will not admit to but will absolutely feel. And if you think that is a final move, then you do not yet know what waits under the last envelope. By the time the certified packet reached my mother's doorway and the notifications about the lease change finished ricocheting through the family chat like a tired rumor looking for a fresh angle, I had already decided that the final move would not look like triumph to anyone who needs applause to recognize power, because what I wanted was not a performance or a confession or even an apology. What I wanted was a structure that could not be undone by the next emotional tide, which is why I spent that week answering every pointed message with the same calm sentences a professional uses when a client tries to drag a boundary across the floor. And when Mark accused me of abandoning family, I replied that a man who wants to be treated like a partner can start by reading a contract all the way to the end. And when Lena tried to frame the new property rules as cruelty, I said that fairness can feel like punishment to people who are used to being the exception, after which I put my phone on do not disturb, made tea, and opened the folder that held the documents I had been building toward for years without calling it a plan, because to survive that house you learn to keep your work private until it is finished, and then you let the paper speak. The scholarship board met in a small room that smelled like new paint and effort. The director thanked me with the kind of gratitude that has nothing to do with flattery. And we voted on the first slate of recipients with a seriousness that would have made my grandmother smile, and although my mother tried to extract her name from the community center by way of a call to a donor she thought she owned, the answer she received was the answer that lives on page 3 of a binding agreement, namely, that the naming rights belong to the party that funds on schedule, which my foundation had done down to the last receipt. So the plaque unveiled that afternoon carried Ruth's name and a short line about first-generation students who were told to be independent. And I gave a brief remark that thanked the staff, mentioned nothing of family, and closed my folder while my mother stood near the doorway pretending not to read every word. And if that felt like a sting, I did not celebrate it. I just breathed, because what healed in that moment was not pride, but a long irritation I had mistaken for normal life. Mark came next with the pitch that always sounds like an apology wrapped around a request, asking me to show him how to park income and optimize liabilities so the mortgage underwriter would look away from the holes. And I told him I do not coach shortcuts because shortcuts are how you end up begging a sister to hold the bag for a bill that has your signature on it, then sent him the name of a reputable accountant who charges real rates and expects real records. And he called me cold, which I let sit because I am finally comfortable with the idea that a woman protecting her peace will be called cold by people who benefit when she runs hot. Lena tried the moral lane for a while, telling anyone who would listen that I had turned business against blood. Yet within a month the simple truth of predictable rent and predictable repairs turned out to be exactly what her boutique needed to stop lurching from panic to panic. And when she paid on time twice in a row, I sent a short note that said I appreciated the professionalism and that if she ever wanted to meet as business owner to talk about marketing channels, I would be available during office hours, and she replied with a period and nothing else, which is how change usually sounds at first when it cannot admit it is relieved. My mother finally asked to meet alone, and I agreed because I wanted to look her in the eye while I retired from the role she kept trying to reassign to me. So we sat at a table that has witnessed more strategy than any boardroom I have known. And she began with a speech about legacy and family and the responsibilities of the eldest daughter, ignoring the fact that I am not the eldest and that duties only seem to land on the woman who declines to barter for praise. And when she finished, I said I heard her, I respected her right to build the family she wants with the tools she prefers, and I would not interfere. Then I slid the final letter across the table, the one that confirmed my formal disclaimer of any present or future interest in her estate. The one that also affirmed my standing instruction that if money ever reached me through oversight, I would assign an equal amount to the scholarship fund within 30 days, not as a performance, but as a habit of cleanliness, and she blinked. In the stunned silence that follows when a weapon goes dull in your hand. If you are looking for the part of the story that answers every question and redeems every person, then you are going to be disappointed, because what I built is not a fairy tale. It is a system that allows me to live without asking permission from people who confuse love with leverage, and the twist, if you need to name it, is that I did not need to win a courtroom or explode a secret or expose a scandal. I needed to hold my ground long enough for the paperwork to catch up to the truth, and once it did, the balance shifted without spectacle, which is why the last envelope in my mother's kitchen drawer contains nothing dramatic, only a copy of the lease addendum that standardized Lena's perks into policy. A one-page note that confirms Mark declined a secured loan at fair terms, and a printed program from Ruth's scholarship ceremony where the next round of students will stand and say thank you to a woman who never put conditions on kindness. And if part of you wonders whether I went too far, I understand the question, but I will leave you with this, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do in a family that feeds on performance is to set down the script, step off the stage, and run the show from the ledger. Because when the last line is spoken and the last letter is filed, what remains is not their approval but your peace, and that is the win I came for and the win I am keeping.